Terrifying dino action, awesome CGI, that bit where Jeff Goldblum has no shirt on? There's a lot to love about the Jurassic Park movies, but that doesn't mean they're scientifically accurate.
Alan!
In Jurassic Park, Dr. Grant and his entourage are touring the park in a Jeep when they're surprised by the sight of an enormous Brachiosaurus, their first glimpse at the living dinosaurs inhabiting Richard Hammond's island. And if that's not enough, the Brachiosaurus decides to show off by rearing up on its hind legs, grabbing some leaves, and coming back to Earth with an almighty boom. The problem with this scene, though, is the Brachiosaurus weighed something like 62 tons and had backwards limbs, with longer legs in the front and shorter legs in back. This ultimately means that the act of rearing up on its hind legs would have used an absolute ton of energy, way more than it could afford to use even if there weren't already plenty of leaves sitting right there at eye level. In fact, Brachiosaurus was so huge, weirdly shaped, and conscious of how much energy it had that it probably didn't even like to walk up hills, let alone do the dinosaur equivalent of a handstand. If nothing else, Jurassic World is a movie about people never learning lessons. After the spectacular failure of John Hammond's Dream Dinosaur theme park, somebody else decides to give the exact same thing a try, and you'll never guess what happens. One of the movie's most famous scenes features a group of pterosaurs zipping down, snatching full-grown humans and flying away with them. In an impressive display of dino-to-dino solidarity, some of them even drop their prey into the Mosasaurus tank. Writing for Wired, physics professor Rhett Elaine pointed out some of the problems with this scene. Comparing the pterosaur to a human, Elaine estimates the movie's version to have a wingspan of around 8 meters. By working out the mass through this calculation, he predicted it to weigh around 86 pounds. In Jurassic World, the pterosaurs attack full-grown humans who would be expected to weigh more than 100 pounds. From a physics perspective, it would be kind of difficult for the pterosaur to pick up a human heavier than itself and then fly further into the sky. Because of this, it's likely that the pterosaurs wouldn't have even bothered going after adult humans in the first place. Of course, kids are a different story. In both the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World movies, velociraptors are portrayed as terrifyingly intelligent, speedy pack hunters.
Clever girl.
But the science suggests that raptors weren't pack animals at all. In a 2007 paper in the Bulletin of the Peabody Museum of Natural History, scientists conducted tests on the teeth of a Deinonychus, believed to be a close relative of the velociraptor. This experiment was an attempt to figure out whether the dinosaur's diet changed from when it was young into adulthood. The logic behind it is simple. Pack animals bring food for their young, so they should have similar teeth throughout their lives, as they'll have the same diet from youth to adulthood. This isn't the case with the Deinonychus, though, which leads to the hypothesis that raptors were actually lone wolves, so to speak. Sunset can't save you in the world of Jurassic Park.
They mostly come at night. Mostly.
Oh, wait, wrong franchise. Point is, the humans in Jurassic Park are as likely to meet a dino in the dark as they are at any other time of day. But this isn't an entirely accurate portrayal, as dinosaurs tended to be diurnal, which means they were active during the day. Newer research suggests that there were also some nocturnal dinosaurs, but these tended to be smaller carnivores such as the velociraptor. This makes sense, too. If they hunted at night, weaker predators wouldn't need to compete for food with their diurnal competitors. Creative license is applied liberally in basically every facet to the Jurassic Park franchise, but things start to get really silly by the time of Jurassic World. In that film, a brand new lab-grown dinosaur known as the Indominus Rex is presented as the next link in the evolution chain. The terrifying creature is a hybrid of a number of dinosaurs, including the T-Rex and Velociraptor, and contains the DNA of other animals like cuttlefish and viper snakes. The dinosaurs of Jurassic Park already operate under the premise that scientists filled in missing genetic information with the DNA from other creatures, which is something that science has actually dabbled in. But the Indominus Rex takes this concept far beyond the realm of possibility. Experts agree that you can't just mix and match a bunch of genes to make new animals. As professor of evolutionary biology Beth Shapiro tells Slate, "I can't cut out a wing gene, insert it into an elephant, and assume I'm going to get an elephant with wings. There is no wing gene."
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Gonna have to stop you right there, John. Maybe Cretaceous Park doesn't roll off the tongue in quite the same way as Jurassic Park does, and let's face it, it's not the easiest thing to pronounce. But that doesn't change the fact that the title of the entire franchise is totally backwards. Some of Jurassic Park's most iconic dinosaurs, including the T-Rex and Velociraptor, lived during the Cretaceous era, which is the geological period that came just after the Jurassic era. So what sorts of dinosaurs would you find in a truly Jurassic Park? Well, the Brachiosaurus, Allosaurus, and Megalosaurus were all Jurassic dinosaurs, and let's give credit where it's due. The first two did show up in the franchise, so it's not like the films were devoid of all things Jurassic. Still, the two biggest stars from the first film were clearly the T-Rex and Velociraptor, and both these species were solidly Cretaceous. So Jurassic Park is somewhat misleading, but then again, Cretaceous Park wouldn't have been precisely correct either. Of course, it doesn't help that Michael Crichton's original novel included a few dinosaurs that lived during the Triassic era. Maybe it was best to stick with Jurassic Park. It does look better on a marquee after all. Sourcing decent sound effects for a movie is not as easy a job as you might imagine. After all, it's not like they can just put some dude in a sound studio and ask him to screech like a T-Rex. For a start, no one really knows what a T-Rex sounded like, so the film's sound effects team, known in the industry as Foley artists, would just have to improvise. Unfortunately, no matter how enthusiastic the Foley team were, there's just no way they wouldn't end up making a noise that sounded a little bit lame. They're only human after all. So the filmmakers had to go elsewhere for sound effects. In the end, the main basis for the T-Rex in Jurassic Park is a baby elephant. There were a couple of other animals in there too, including the snarl of a tiger and the gurgling of an alligator. Sadly, nobody will ever know for sure what T-Rex sounded like, because the tissue inside an animal that's responsible for making sound isn't preserved during fossilization. The best scientists can do is look at the dinosaur's closest living relatives. Bad news for Jurassic Park's Foley artists though, because birds don't make sounds like tigers or elephants. They just sound like birds. So in reality, the T-Rex probably sounded more like a hawk than anything else, or maybe it even chirped like a sparrow. Heck, one study in 2016 suggested they may have honked like a goose. But yeah, maybe not. Interestingly, what seems like the most science-based aspect of the Jurassic Park franchise is, as it turns out, total bunk. The sad truth is that literally no one has ever recovered dino DNA from a piece of amber, or from anything else for that matter. In fact, the closest they've ever come is some weird unidentified DNA someone found in a dinosaur bone, but even that might not necessarily have been dinosaur DNA. It could have just as easily been the DNA of something far less interesting, like bacteria or an earthworm. And even if scientists knew where it came from, it wasn't in any kind of usable state. Scientists couldn't even identify it, much less recover and sequence it. DNA, as it turns out, is just as fragile as skin and muscle, meaning it starts to decay as soon as the animal it belongs to dies. What's more, scientists have actually tried to extract DNA from insects preserved in amber a la Jurassic Park, and have learned that amber in particular is an immensely bad DNA preservative. Oh, and here's a nitpick and a half for you. The mosquito that is pictured in the movie's chunk of amber is Toxorhynchites rutilis, a species that doesn't actually feed on blood, so it wouldn't have fed on dino DNA anyway. Early in the first Jurassic Park movie, it's explained that the DNA found inside those ancient mosquitoes was incomplete, so the geneticists responsible for cloning the Jurassic Park dinos just handily filled in the gaps with frog DNA, because, well, why not frogs? Anyway, the end result is that the frog DNA lets the all-female population of dinosaurs change biological sex, giving them the ability to reproduce.
Life found a way.
Aside from the fact that DNA splicing across species is nigh on impossible, there's one big problem with this. Doesn't it seem like maybe the geneticists should know which genes they were splicing into that T-Rex they're making, and maybe avoid the gender-bending ones? Science Direct believes that this plot point would have been a lot more believable if the gender switching had happened as a result of temperature or external stresses, instead of the use of frog DNA, since biological sex isn't determined by genetics but by environmental factors. In the end, an incubator set to the wrong temperature might have been a more plausible cause for the presence of male dinos in Jurassic Park. In the first Jurassic Park film, Dennis Nedry encounters a Dilophosaurus in the forest as he's attempting to escape with a pack of stolen dinosaur embryos. This particular Dilophosaurus is a tiny little dinosaur with a fancy neck frill that spits venom all over poor Dennis, who is then devoured for good measure. And let's face it, that makes for a pretty dramatic, terrifying, and arguably well-deserved death for the movie's key human villain. In reality, however, Dilophosaurus was nothing like the creature in the film. The real Dilophosaurus was actually more than 20 feet long, which means it wouldn't have needed venom to be an effective predator, and that fits with the evidence, since nothing seems to indicate that the real dinosaur ever spat venom. Jurassic Park's Dilophosaurus also had those vibrating neck frills, which are similar to the frilled neck lizard that's native to Australia. This little creature uses its elaborate neck frills along with its yellow mouth to intimidate larger animals. For the frilled neck lizard, this tactic is merely a bluff. If it's not successful in frightening its foe, it simply turns and runs away. In the Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus, however, it's unclear what this strategy might be for. Surely this Dilophosaurus doesn't want to scare its prey away, and in real life, the 20-foot beast would have been scary enough without the extra bizarre and unnecessary bells and whistles. But hey, this means the smaller movie version gets to show a little teeth, and who can blame a dinosaur for wanting to show off every now and again? When you read your dinosaur picture books as a kid, you don't tend to see a lot of feathers, so it's kind of hard for most people to reshape their ideas of how dinosaurs looked. The T-Rex presents a special problem here because most people imagine T-Rex as an animal that looks exactly like the one in Jurassic Park. That's the power of cinema for you. But scientists now think that the T-Rex really did have feathers. Granted, adult T-Rexes may not have been completely covered with feathers, but they probably at least had patches of feathers on their heads, backs, and tails. Juveniles were likely to be even more feathered. In fact, there's a good chance you'd be better off describing them as fluffy. Feathers weren't unique to just a few species of dinosaur either. Scientists now believe that nearly all non-avian dinosaurs had feathers. This means that all the dinos in Jurassic Park really should have been rocking the peacock look. To be fair though, the whole dinosaurs had feathers theory wasn't really a done deal in 1993. It wasn't until 2007, in fact, that scientists found quill knobs on the forelimb of a velociraptor fossil. And by then, the Jurassic Park dinos were already established as featherless, so it would have been kinda weird to change that in the follow-up movies. If you're ever unlucky enough to encounter a T-Rex in the wild or in, San Diego, you might be tempted to follow the advice of Dr. Alan Grant in Jurassic Park.
Don't move. Can't see us if we don't move.
Unfortunately for Dr. Grant, T-Rex could see just fine, and standing very, very still would have been a great way to get eaten. How did scientists figure that out? Well, they built scale models of a T-Rex and did experiments involving glass eyeballs and laser pointers, and from there were able to discern the visual field, binocular range, and depth perception of the king or queen of dinosaurs. Based on their results, T-Rex had a binocular range that was likely broader than that of a hawk. Calculations also seem to suggest that T-Rex's eyeball had visual clarity between 3 and 4 times better than a hawk's, which is the equivalent of 13 times better than a human. So yeah, standing totally still might not have been quite as good a tactic as, say, running away as fast as you possibly can. This is a cheetah. Cheetahs are incredibly fast, but they only have access to their top speed of 75 miles per hour for roughly a quarter of a mile or so, after which they have to decelerate. On average, a cheetah can really only run about 40 miles per hour for any length of time, and even then it needs to catch its prey pretty quickly or risk running out of fuel. T-Rex was, scientifically speaking, way bigger than a cheetah. And as you might expect, bigger animals tend not to be the fastest. In fact, it's the medium-sized animals like the cheetah that rule when it comes to achieving top speeds. So a cheetah might have been able to keep up with that Jeep for a few beats, but even then it would have pretty quickly fallen behind. A T-Rex, however, wouldn't have stood a chance. In fact, scientists now think T-Rex's legs were too long compared to the rest of its body for it to be capable of running at all. If it tried, its legs might have snapped under the weight of its body. Instead, it probably walked everywhere, although to be fair, it was a pretty fast walker, reaching a top speed of around 25 miles per hour. Fast enough to catch a human on foot, sure, but not fast enough by far to keep pace with a Jeep, even for a few seconds. In the first Jurassic Park, the velociraptors hunt their young victims through the park's visitor center, leading to a pretty amazing revelation. They're smart. Like, smart enough to figure out the mechanics of a door handle and let themselves into the kitchen in which the kids are hiding. In fact, later on in the franchise, it becomes clear that they're smart enough to actually be trained and given orders. So how smart were they really? Well, the University of Arizona says they were at least as clever as a rabbit, but probably not quite as intelligent as a dog. But just because they were smart as certain modern animals doesn't necessarily mean they were smart in the same way. Since their brains were so primitive, their intelligence could have been confined to the development of their senses, meaning they probably weren't capable of developing strategies or opening doors. T-Rex, however, might have been an exception. It had a pretty big brain, and some scientists think it might have been genuinely intelligent, even as smart as a chimpanzee, which means opening a door handle could have been well within its capabilities. If it could reach one, that is.